So this may look a lot like the previous Insta360 One X2, but the brand new X3 promises to offer more than just incremental updates. In this video, a rundown of the newest 360 action camera sent over to the channel from Insta360 that I've been using for the past few weeks. Now, being that the previous generation is called the Insta360 One X2, it would be logical to name this new camera the Insta360 One X3. But thankfully, they simplified the model naming scheme, and this new iteration is just called the X3. Find out what I like and dislike about this camera in the context of recording bike-specific footage. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, but basically this is essentially two cameras in one. A 5.7K 360 camera and a 4K action camera. Not unlike the One RS, but the X3 doesn't require you to swap lenses, as it's all done with the two onboard 4K lenses. So actually, it's kind of like three cameras in one, since each side of the 360 camera can act as a standalone 4K action camera. Now, to be clear, the One X2 also had the ability to act as a 360 camera and an action camera, an option that they called Steadicam mode in the last iteration. But it wasn't as capable as an action camera since it maxed out at 1440 resolution. Now, the X3, on the other hand, employs a half-inch sensor, which is significantly larger than the outgoing One X2, and each side can now act as a legitimate standalone 4K action camera, which I imagine is why the new X3's interface prominently features both 360 mode and single lens mode on its giant updated 2.3-inch touchscreen that wraps around the edges of the camera body. Pretty sleek if you ask me. Now, this is a welcome upgrade, and in my opinion, the user experience is vastly improved over the One X2. Now, if you recall, the One X2 had this cute little circular screen that was an inch or so in diameter, and it looks cool and it matches the camera's aesthetic, but it wasn't super easy to use. Now, this new screen on the X3 is really responsive and definitely the biggest screen on any of the Insta360 consumer grade cameras to date. Now, it clearly indicates the two modes, single lens or 360 mode, and once selected, the shooting options change accordingly. Now, while in 360 mode, it still maxes out at 5.7K, which was somewhat of a limitation on the One X2 and the One RS, as you can't crop too far into a 360 clip without it starting to get pixelated. So I kind of expected the new X3 to bump that up maybe to an 8K 360 camera. However, the increased sensor size, while it doesn't improve the resolution, does seem to produce better looking footage than the One X2 while in 360 mode. Now, in action cam mode, I like that you can easily switch from the inner lens to the outer lens just by hitting a button on the screen. And with the One RS, on the other hand, this required physically flipping the lens over, which required removing the battery, which in turn required removing the protective cage. So it wasn't a super quick swap on the One RS. Now, with the X3, of course, there are two physical lenses, and all the switching is done in software, so it's really easy to switch to a front-facing or a rear-facing configuration. Now, this is really great for vlogging or getting selfie shots in general, since you can easily frame yourself, and then you can switch to the outer lens to use it like a normal action camera. Now, I also like that in either mode, single lens or 360, you can quickly adjust the settings without having to dive too deeply into any submenus. In my experience, pretty much all the stuff that you'd want to change on the fly is right there on the home screen. 360 versus single lens mode, resolution, frame rate, and even orientation, which I'll address in just a minute. And then if you want to go into more specific settings like white balance and color profiles and such, you can always access the settings menu and dive into those parameters. Now, one new addition that I really like is a customizable profiles menu, so that you can quickly change from mode to mode depending on your preferences. For instance, you can create a profile for 360 mode at, say, 5.7K, 30 frames per second, and then you can create a separate profile for action camera mode that shoots at 1080p at 60 frames per second with a wide angle view at 16:9 aspect ratio. And then by pressing the physical button on the side of the camera, you can toggle between those two modes, or you can cycle through multiple modes if you have more than two. Now, when it comes to the actual user experience when trying to capture your bike rides, I mean, the camera is just really good. I'd say most of the shortcomings of the previous generation cameras have pretty much been addressed with the X3. So first off, I like to get both GoPro style action cam footage and third-person 360 footage on any given ride. Now, for me, this used to mean bringing the One X2 and a separate GoPro and then juggling between the two cameras. And then with the One RS, it was a little bit better since I only had to bring along one camera and then the extra lens to get both 360 and action cam footage. But now with the X3, I really think this might be the only camera you need to bring to get usable clips in both styles of video. I think the addition of the larger sensor and the 4K single lens mode has made it a viable replacement for a standalone action camera. And you gotta keep in mind, it's still not just as simple as bringing the camera. You will need the invisible selfie stick for your 360 shots and some kind of fixed mount for your action shots, like a helmet mount or the handlebar mount, or yes, of course, as nerdy as it looks, the Chesty mount, which is honestly my preferred method since the footage just comes out much more dynamic. So as far as the types of footage you can get with this camera while on a bike, you're really only limited by your imagination. But I'll share a few of my go-to shots for when I'm out on a bike. Now for 360 shots, I really like the kind of front-facing 3/4 view where you can see the bike and the rider and some of the terrain. If you're doing any kind of vlogging, this is a great option since you're framed up really nicely. Now for audio, there's also an option to add an external mic, which would probably be the best way to go since even with the wind reduction on, it still actually picks up quite a bit of wind noise. Now I also like the low angle forward facing 3/4 shot since it shows the rider and the bike, but it also features the route and the terrain a little bit and emphasizes speed pretty well, especially if you hold it close to the ground. Just be careful, of course, not to hit the ground since the lenses are extremely susceptible to scratches since they protrude outward from either side of the camera. Now you can get sacrificial stick-on lens guards, which make a lot of sense, and I really think they should be included in the box, but they're not. Now for both of these shots, I don't have the selfie stick extended all the way, maybe about 3/4 of the full length, but you can experiment and see what you like. You just have to keep in mind the longer it's extended, the harder it is to keep steady, and it's already kind of a juggling act to hold the stick and the handlebars and focus on not crashing. So, use good judgment and try not to spear oncoming cyclists or hikers or trees. That would be bad. Now, other 360 shots include the over the back shot for a third person drone follow type shot. And if you're riding with someone, the low to the ground forward shot flanked by either bike is a really cool one as well. Now, regardless of which shot you choose, anytime you're in 360 mode, you will eventually need to reframe your shot, which just means to choose the frame within the 360 sphere of footage. It is an extra step in the process, but honestly, this is what makes 360 video so cool. You can basically shoot first and then compose the shot later. Since it's always recording everything around itself, basically, if you can see the camera, it can see you. Now, there are a few ways to reframe your shot. You can use the standalone Insta360 Studio desktop app, which sounds daunting, I know, but it's really a pretty lightweight software and easy to use. You just drop your INSV files, which are your 360 video files, into the program, and then you can reframe the shot pretty quickly since all the relevant tools are prominently displayed. Now, keep in mind if you're shooting 360 video at 5.7K, each recording consists of 2 files, which are both required to form the total sphere of footage. You just have to make sure to import both files for each clip that you want to reframe. Then when you're done, you just export the reframed clip to a flat format like an MP4. Now, I also believe there's a reframing plugin for standard editing software like Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro, but I haven't actually experimented with those yet. And then the third way, of course, is the mobile app, which is really good. It's definitely not just an afterthought like some apps that accompany new hardware. In the Insta360 mobile app, you can quickly access the files on your camera by connecting to it via Bluetooth, and then you can reframe your shot and export the flat video to your phone, all without needing to download the raw files onto your phone first. It makes the process really quick, and while the output quality is slightly lower when using the mobile app, it's plenty clear for social media posts. Okay, so that's 360 mode bikey shots. What about single lens mode? Well, for me, I've essentially been using the X3 as a replacement for a GoPro, which means I primarily like to have it chesty mounted to capture point of view shots on fast descents. Now, since it's a 4K camera that shoots up to 30 frames per second, it's pretty perfect for getting that POV shot just like you would from a GoPro. Now, the one thing that struck me as kind of strange is that there's only the 1/4-20 mount on the bottom of the camera. So if you do use the included GoPro adapters, then it means that the camera is mounted straight outward from the chest, which definitely looks a little bit weird. But more importantly, it's kind of uncomfortable and kind of unstable, since the camera's weight extends several inches outward, giving it a larger moment of inertia. Now, what all this means is that it can cause bumpy footage, even with the onboard flow state stabilization, which, by the way, is really good. So that's kind of a limitation on the single lens mounting option, but I actually mocked up a quick and easy mount to secure the camera horizontally and critically closer to the body, so it feels a lot lighter and stays more stable during descents. It's really simple. It's fundamentally a modified L bracket with GoPro compatible fingers and a slot for mounting the X3. And I have to say, it's been working out pretty well. The setup feels a lot lighter on the body and it's much more compact. And in my case, the footage is just plain better, so it's a win-win for sure. Now, if you're interested in one of these mounts for your own One X2 or the new X3, you can find more information down in the description. Now, to actually use the camera in horizontal mode and not have to rotate a bunch of video files in post, it's actually really easy to switch to 9:16 aspect ratio and have it be ready to go in horizontal mode. Now in this mode, it'll still shoot 4K 30, but for some reason, it'll only allow you to go ultra wide field of view as opposed to the action field of view option like it does when it's oriented vertically. Now, I'm not sure why this is. It's probably some kind of hardware restriction, but it would be nice if it let you use the action FOV while mounted horizontally. Now, at this point, you might ask, why not just shoot 360 mode on the descents as well and never have to mess with single lens mode? Well, the only reason I still prefer to shoot in single lens mode like a GoPro is precisely that you don't need to reframe the shot after, which saves a lot of time. I'll generally reserve 360 shots for more creative shots where the camera is moving around in space and I'm not exactly sure how to frame it up on the fly. Now, on the other hand, with the standard chest mounted shot, the camera is fixed, so there's no real need to use a 360 option in my opinion. Okay, so how about some likes and dislikes? Well, first, I like that the battery compartment is easy to open and close, and I also like that the SD card is easily accessible within that compartment. I also really like the quarter 20 mount directly in the camera's body. With the One RS, for instance, if you want the invisible selfie stick to actually be invisible, you have to make sure that the stick and the camera line up, otherwise you could get some of the stick in your shot. I also think the mobile app is one of the best that I've seen in this space, and I think it does a great job of streamlining the workflow going from raw footage to publishable clips. Now, as far as dislikes, I think that the battery is the same one as the One X2, but don't quote me on that. And while it is pretty good, I do think that it drains a little bit quicker than on the One X2, mostly because of that giant screen on the X3. But I haven't tested batteries side by side, and I will admit that I've been shooting a lot more 4K with the X3 than with the One X2, so maybe that's why I felt that the X3 battery drains a little bit quicker. Still, having said that, I haven't actually run out of battery on a ride yet with the X3, and it'll easily last a few hours of taking short clips of up to a couple minutes in length, spaced out by a few minutes at a time. Now, I also mentioned this already, but the vertical footprint and the quarter 20 mount at the bottom doesn't make the X3 particularly conducive to chest mounting. But again, with the simple bracket like the one I've been using, it can easily be mounted horizontally, which again makes it feel much lighter and more stable. So I guess the big question is, if you have the One X2 or even the One RS, should you actually upgrade and pick up the X3? In other words, are the improvements more than just incremental upgrades? And ultimately, is it actually worth it to upgrade to the newest iteration? Well, of course, that's going to be a personal choice, but I will say that if you like the idea of being able to get both 360 and single lens footage in the same camera, then it is a great option. Now, yes, of course, the One RS and the One X2 both do 360 and single lens footage, but they both have their quirks, and I think that the X3 solves some of the minor drawbacks of the outgoing models. Now, specifically with the One RS, you get high quality 360 and single lens footage, but you've got to carry around that extra lens. Plus, the mounting for the One RS isn't super conducive to 360 recording, since anytime you're in 360 mode, you have to make sure that you're perfectly aligned with the selfie stick. Now, on the other hand, with the One X2, you get that compactness of a single camera body that can do both styles of video, but the single lens mode just seemed to be more of an afterthought and can't achieve the higher resolution of a dedicated 4K camera. Also, the circular screen on the One X2 is just not quite big enough to be super useful. I think that Insta360 has addressed these issues pretty well with the X3, with the 4K single lens mode and the huge screen in the same footprint as the One X2. And I have to say, I do see the X3 as more than just an incremental step up from either of the previous generation cameras. Now, I'm gonna guess that the main criticism of the X3 is going to be that the 360 camera still tops out at 5.7K, and that some people might be demanding an 8K camera in the same footprint as the X3. Maybe that'll be the next iteration of this camera, but I also have to remind myself that this is a consumer grade camera meant for fun and creative video shot by the average user. 8K video files will get huge and the post-processing workflow will become more and more demanding. Now, you have to keep in mind that Insta360 does make an 8K 360 camera called the Pro 2, but it's a professional grade VR camera and costs about 10 times as much as the X3. All right, well, that's gonna wrap it up for this one. I hope you enjoyed this more techie review on this channel. If you're interested in picking up your own X3, definitely consider using the affiliate link down in the description. Of course, I'll get a small kickback, which I appreciate, and I think you might get a bonus accessory as well. Thanks again for watching, and thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.